Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. And let me move the camera so you don't need to see the mess to my side here. And I'll move my chair a little bit. Sorry about that. You could look at the mess at my back table. Anyway, first of all, you guys, welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. I am um, having a great day. I'm super excited to talk to my guest tonight. But before we get to my guest, as you guys know, the usual spiel, right? Well, first off, don't forget you can go on Amazon and pick up the Whimsical Whiz. It is the complete 2023 collection. And it's got a few bonus pages in the back, but it's the complete comic strip of the Whiz. 2024 will be out sometime this year with some bonus strips. You remember it was more of a D&D type story if you read it regularly, and there will be extra strips that I'm currently drawing of some of the people in the campaign that were there along with them, with the Wiz and Ajax and everybody. So the Whimsical Wiz on Amazon. Also on Amazon or on Bold Venture Press, you can go pick up Zorro's Exploits right here or Zorro's Swordplay and Romance. I illustrated 2 stories in here, 1 in here. Big Zorro fan. Love this stuff. The stories in here are great. I've read almost all in both books. Definitely fun stuff to check out. And this one, I got to, both my stories were monster stories. So I got to illustrate some fun monsters. That was cool. And last but not least, the ongoing comic newspaper, A Kid in a Comic. All right. This is filled with a bunch of great artists, all professionals, some, a lot of them in the indie world here. The Wiz does appear in here, and dropped it. I'm sorry. I lost that page. He's usually kind of in the middle here, not that middle. I like showing it off to see which one I got today, so it's always on the page I can't grab. There it is. This is the latest edition of the Wiz. So you can check it out. But my friends of the show, J.M. DeSantis is in here. There's so many people. Matt Hansel, who was on the show a few months back. His Marty and Spud is in here. Tim Jones of Sour Grapes. I love everything in here. I'm actually reaching out to see if I can get a few of the people on here to talk with to come on the show. But yeah, anyway, go to kidinacomic.com. Follow them on all social media. You can access the stuff there. It's fantastic. So tonight, I have a fantastic guest. I have been following mostly on Instagram. We're connected on other social media pages, but I've been looking at his work a lot on Instagram, and I love the character so much. And I've read a lot of what I don't want to say I read a lot. I've read reviews and what people thought about the book, and this seemed like something right up my alley. So I knew I had to talk to the guest, and he was kind enough to send me a couple of digital issues, and I got to read 2, and they were a lot of fun. We're going to talk about everything, but let's bring on tonight's guest, Randy Ronaldo. Hello, Randy.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm excited. Hold on. All those books I just showed fell.
Sure.
So first off, thank you for coming on and taking the time to chat with me and to let my audience get to know you
Yeah.
better and your work better today. So
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate
oh
it.
yeah, totally. I meant everything,
Yeah.
that I
It's really
said.
kind.
It was I had a lot of fun reading. It's called Rob Haynes. But before we get into talking about that, for the people who are unfamiliar with you, unfamiliar with work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, kind of maybe a bit about your career, what got you into comics, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I I early on I just liked comics, but what really I guess got me into it were it was weird. I started reading some comics, but then I started taking out borrowing books on the history of comics. And
Hmm.
what for some reason really enthralled me were the old adventure strips of the 30s and 40s, even though they
Yeah,
were way before my time. And so we were talking about Milton Caniff
yeah.
as Terry and the Pirates and Roy Crane's, Captain Easy. And so I don't know why I got so interested in that, but that's what I liked. And I was reading other comics at the time. I mean, the first comics I got into in terms of mainstream, I loved Sergeant Rock. And as a matter of fact, my earliest comics that I did on my own at home were Sergeant Rock ripoffs. And as a matter of fact, it goes back to my character because it was called Sergeant Haynes and Hell Platoon. And
Okay.
these are terribly drawn and written, but I used to draw them and pass them around my classmates in junior high school. So that's what I got into it. But I really like Terry and the Pirates, and this I should say that this was before those strips started being collected. Really, I
Mm.
mean, so I was only seeing these excerpts, and even those excerpts really interested me. And then there were some books that started collecting them a little, and I started seeing, longer. Uh, uh, Excerpts of stories, and then there were, it's funny when I look back. It seems like such a long period of over a long period of time, but we're talking within like several months that this all happened. Some of the first collections of Terry and the Pirates started coming out, and I
Mm.
got it out of a bookstore. These were these Flying Buttress collections before the really full length collections came on.
Hmm.
So I started getting that, and then the other little piece of that I should add is that like a lot of other people, Jules Pfeiffer's book, The Great Comic Book Heroes, was a big thing, and in
Yeah.
there was the Spirit,
Yeah.
and that's what introduced me to the Spirit. And then when I moved to California, I I discovered my first comic book store. This was in the late '70s. It was weird because I was in New York, and there probably started to be comic book stores, but I was completely unaware
Hmm.
of all the fan stuff going on in New York. So I had no connection to any of that when I was growing up. But when I moved to California, I discovered my first comic book store, and that's when I discovered um, the Warren magazine, Spirit magazines.
Hmm.
So I was reading that, but I was also reading again a lot of mainstream comics. I mean, I got out of regular comics for a while, but I got into the Micronauts big. That's what really got me back into mainstream comics. And
Yeah.
I like Batman, Superman, and then when I was in college, again, that's when I think the Terry and the Pirates started being collected. So I was getting that, but I was like everyone else. I was buying, Batman, Superman, the Fantastic Four with John Byrne, all those series. X-Men. I was reading all that. So I read a
Yeah.
whole bunch of comics. But when I finished college, I decided to get serious about maybe doing my own strip, and I wanted to do. I really wanted to do an adventure strip, and I had actually come up with the character in the late '70s, and I even did some samples, quote, sample strips that were, of course, terrible. But that's where Rob Haynes came from. And again, it was kind of an outgrowth of this Sergeant Haynes character, but I wanted to do this young detective. And just to give people a background of what the series is, it's Rob Haynes' adventures. He's a private investigator for a detective agency called Justice International that's has offices all around the world. And basically, that's the way I get him into a whole variety of adventures all over the world. It's a globe-trotting series. I always point out that every story is self-contained, so people can pick it up with any issue. And the other little thing I did is that I vary the storylines and genres a lot within the series. So I've had stories that are almost straight comedies. I have a sports issue. I have uh, I have an issue that's kind of a mashup between superheroes and a romance comic. So I've done a whole lot of different kind of tones and genres within the series. And then I should say that then in the '90s, I started doing it as a zine, you know,
Okay.
and that's where it started getting attention because I actually had shared it with places like with some small publishers, and they picked it up, but my timing has always been awful. I've twice, and this was during the 80s, I guess the black and white independent boom.
Hmm.
Twice I got picked up by publishers, actually three times, and then they went under right before.
Oh,
I mean, at once it was even solicited, but the company went
right.
under.
Oh,
So that's when I started doing it as a zine, and then I was actually also mailing it to people and publishers I liked, and that started surprisingly getting a lot of. I started getting a lot of feedback, and looking back, when I often tell young people, oh, that's they're still around, but now the zine and independent market with print on demand, they've kind of merged, but they were kind
mhm,
of separate worlds. But doing it as a zine, I always say it helped. It gave me time to develop, and
mhm.
as an artist. And if you look at my early stuff, it was really cartoony, it was really crude compared to what it is now. So I'm glad that early stuff was in the zines. And then again, I was part of the 90s self-publishing boom, and that's when I started. When the zine started getting a lot of attention, that's when I went into doing full-size comic books, a full-size independent comic book series. It was first called Adventure Strip Digest. I went 4 issues, and then I relaunched it in 2000 as Rob Haynes Adventures, and I've been doing it ever since. And I
Mhm.
have the 26th issue coming out um, probably in July. Generally, I always have a new issue at the San Diego Comic Con because that's the place I always exhibit.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have 26 issues. I'll have 26 issues by the end of this year, and I've started collecting them in trade paperback too. So
It's
that's
nice.
just kind of the general background of the
Yeah, yeah.
series.
Wow. Um, well, if anybody, just to the audience, if anybody watched my Instagram reel, I kind of geeked out a little bit about influence and style that I saw within your work. I mentioned that I really saw a lot of. I felt like there was a very Alex Toth feel to it.
Mhm.
There was a Will Eisner, feel to some of the characters, especially the with certain inking and lighting. I felt I saw that in there. But also I felt there was like a European influence with things like Tintin and obviously American strips like you mentioned Terry and the Pirates. Like I was a big Milton Caniff fan. Actually, I studied under Dick Rockwell, who was
Oh, yeah,
Caniff's inker on
right.
Steve Canyon until Caniff passed away, and then he finished the strip for a year. So
Yeah.
I studied comics under him, and for one of my college classes,
Wow.
and it was really cool getting to know him. But I mean, he's passed away now too. But it was a really interesting time because of the work I got to see and from him. But yeah, no, like and the other thing is like he had a lot of stuff from other artists, so I got to see really
Wow.
cool things, and like your stuff really gives me that classic storytelling feel. Now I've only read the first 2 issues, so I can't talk about the books that came later. But in the first 2 issues, I thoroughly enjoyed them, and I got that feel of classic old school newspaper strip told with more of a modern illustration style. Um, so can you talk to me? Did I get it right with any of your influences?
Yeah.
And how, like, what was it about their work that like inspires you to put it into Rob Haynes?
Yeah, I mean it's several factors. One is, obviously like with Alex Toth and Milton Caniff, I really just like the art, the black and white art, in terms of
Mhm.
the shadows and things like that. I don't know, it really appealed to me. But what I also liked about those strips, I like generally the real world aspects of it for some reason. I mean,
Mhm.
I I, I don't know if that's a conscious thing, but that for some reason I like that grounded feel. Like in Terry and the Pirates, especially, I like that it was taking place during World War II.
Mhm.
And so there were some parallel things going on with real life, And that's what I try to do with my own stories. In that, it's really just for the germ of an idea, or it's a setting. But I do, I often call it a rip from the headlines approach. That I have a lot of, a lot of things that happen in the real world kind of make its way into the strip. Although of course, I fictionalize it, and it's again, it's just more a background element just to make the story interesting. Because I like to think front and center is kind of a history or a mystery, or an assignment, and having some and a little bit of comedy
Mhm.
in there. But that said, I've always liked the real world aspects of it. And as a matter of fact, for the 26th issue, and I think you posted it on some of the promotional images, Rob's going to space. And
Mhm.
I mean, I've made a joke that it's like the Dick Tracy when he went to the moon kind of thing. Have I jumped the shark? But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I sometimes I was saying that I've always kind of wanted to do a story set in space, and but this is a weird connection. I always remember that in Moonraker, in which I know is that this the James Bond movie.
Mhm.
I know that movie hasn't aged well, but the scene, the climactic scene with the space shuttles and everyone coming out and having that space battle, that was cool to me when I was a kid. I said, "Oh, I'd love to do something like that." Now it's not quite that, but when I say going to space, what happened is, now we have a billionaire space race going on,
Yeah.
and people, there's space tourism. And so that now put it into the edge of credibility. And then I also, again, to say the other piece of real world news that made it into the story is just the whole crypto bro kind of culture. I have and I don't know if you're familiar, but when Samuel Bankman Fried went to jail, and there's some other crypto person who mysteriously died under strange circumstances. That's kind of in the mix of the story. It's
Okay.
kind of mashed in. But anyway, that's so. But so even though Rob goes to space, so that's the cool setting. There
Mhm.
is, a mystery and an adventure. That's part of it. So, but I do have space shuttles and explosions in space and things like that. So that's fun. Um, yeah, so that was part of it. And then you mentioned like Tintin and the Europeans. I'm familiar with them, but they came a little later. I mean, I don't know if they made their way into my work as much as they were influenced by the same things as me.
Mhm.
So that's why there's a similarity. But I've had that. Yeah, people say Tintin, and I sometimes use that because sometimes people don't know Terry and the Pirates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I try not to. I don't often push that, when
Yeah.
I'm promoting the book. But if someone knows it, they'll immediately get get it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great when I'm at conventions. When I have my banners behind me, it's really nice that just from the art style, people right away, if they get that, whether it's Johnny Quest, that's another thing I often
Uh,
get, all that adventure stuff, it really comes through in the art,
yeah.
which attracts people to the booth if they haven't seen it. But once they see the art, it's nice that the art reads very easily to tell people what it is.
Yeah, I was going to mention because we talked about Toth, but it does remind me of the Hanna Barbera
Yeah,
superhero era
right,
of characters. I mean, obviously not the superheroes themselves, but the
right,
look that they tried to bring into it, especially with like a Birdman realism of the military
yeah,
and like that type of lighting that Toth was trying to do with
right,
it and stuff. So yeah, I see that a lot. And honestly, for me, he is probably the greatest of all
yeah,
time. And same thing with Eisner.
yeah,
Those two are up there on in my top 10 list. I mean, I'm also a big Gil Kane fan. Like,
yeah,
I love his stuff. I literally will look at Gil's work and spend time copying it. Like, he's
right,
one of those like artists I go back and practice a lot.
right.
And but yeah, no, it's I'm just looking at it on my other screen right now, and I'll show some in a bit. But yeah, I just really like this guy right here is screaming at me like the one I'm currently looking at, like this is something you'd see in like a Toth book, and I love it. I love, and let me ask you, because it's in black and white that I'm looking
Yeah.
at. Now, obviously, when you were doing book one, you were in the 90s, maybe even earlier when you were doing this story. So you weren't on the computer. Are you still working traditional, or do you do everything? Do you work
No,
digital?
it's really evolved. Yeah, I mean, if as a matter of fact, I have some original work here from way back, and this is all old school. You know,
Yeah.
this is all on the page. The Zipatone too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Zipatone.
Yeah.
And I often say, wow, I obviously I like my work now, but the original art is not like this.
Mhm.
It's so I was like I said, I've it's evolved. I'd say about maybe 60% of it is, or maybe even less, maybe half is on the page, and the rest is digital. And when I say digital, I'm talking about lettering, the
Mhm.
Zipatone, um, and I do use some 3D a bit. I've started using that a little.
Yeah.
Sometimes there was a period where I felt I got too hooked on that, so I tried to back off. But so I do some digital, but yeah, but it's evolved a lot. And I often say, as a matter of fact, when I discovered how to do Zipatone on Photoshop, I said, short of aside from my marriage and my kids, that was the happiest day of my life.
Yeah, I love Photoshop. I ended up getting rid of it just because I had the entire Adobe suite, and
Yeah,
I just didn't want to pay the money monthly, and I'm on Clip Studio Paint
yeah, I am
now.
too.
And I think it is so much easier in Clip Studio Paint
Yeah,
to add those half tones. I'm
yeah,
like, that is the great.
yeah,
Like, I feel the same way when I learned how to do half tones
yeah.
in Clip Studio. It was just amazing.
Yeah, and it was
Um,
hard to find the
yeah.
Zipatone at the time. It's funny. The workaround I discovered, which was great, was there was a product called Sticky Back, which
Mhm.
was just. I hope this is okay, getting all technical
Yeah,
here.
yeah, no, that's fine. I like
It
this stuff.
was it was just, I don't know what it was for, but it was clear acetate. I guess it was for people to copy stuff. So I used to photocopy the Zipatone. I had one master Zipatone. I used to copy the tone onto that, and I had because you could get a box of 100 for like $40 compared to
Yeah.
Zipatone, which was kind of pricey and hard to find. So, but what was funny, this was before like digital printers. So I used to say that I got to know every photocopy, every Kinko's around my place, and the specific machines very intimately, in terms of knowing which machines would print, because that kind of tone, it had to be as even as possible. And
Yeah.
back then machines, like I said, today with the digital, I think they're a lot more consistent. But back then, depending on the toner and stuff, it was kind of a crapshoot to make sure that it would print evenly. So I actually still have all that Zipatone, but like I said, yeah, once I discovered how to do that in Photoshop. But I've also gone away from Photoshop. I use Clip Studio Paint, but it still, it does only about 90% of what I need, or maybe about 95%. So I went to Affinity. If
I have
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
Affinity
because
stuff.
because the only thing with Clip Studio Paint is that the lettering and like the sound effects, you can't manipulate the lettering like I like to sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you remember, I don't overdo it, but like Will Eisner especially would do a lot of things with letterings, like the words would get kind of like
Yeah.
and screaming and stuff like that, and that's hard to do in Clip Studio Paint. I mean, you can get you can make the big shouting lettering, but I like to like where you change they're not on the same level. The letters are kind of bounced around. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I like to be able to do that, and you can't do that in Clip Studio Paint. I do that separately in another program, and then I lay it in as a layer.
That is
So
that's good to know. It's really cool because I when I drew the Wiz is it's a humor strip. I didn't
yeah,
go crazy with anything in there. It
sure,
was I created a template that was either 3 or 4 panels or a single panel, and I just drew in there. And by the way, there is a comment from Sillyville that it's about a convention question. So I'm gonna ask that in a moment. I just want to let him know that I haven't that I do see, and I just uh, want to finish what I was going to say. And so I didn't do anything crazy. But now I stopped doing the Wiz because I have other stories I want to tell.
Mhm.
And I'm actually going back to drawing traditional because one of my New Year's resolutions was to get off screens as much as possible this year because I spend so much time between my day job, drawing comics, whatever. So for me, my screen time is really reference material. And I'm in the process actually of teaching myself Blender so I can build
Oh,
spaceships like my certain aspects of my comics that I'm working on, so that I have the 3D models instead of constantly redrawing
right.
and change the angle, print it up, trace it onto
Yeah.
the thing. But I am going to do my toning in um, digitally. I am going to do lettering digitally, so I'm still going to use it. But yeah, no, it's a good to know that you can't do certain things in Clip Studio, but because that's my program of choice myself. But let's go to Sillyville. His real name is David. So David asks, he's doing his first Comic Con this year. I don't have a budget for a tarp or a poster. Any suggestions to make a unique booth?
Yeah, yeah, I understand he doesn't have money, but a banner isn't that super expensive when you
Yeah,
look at them. Really, I mean, you can get them for under 100 sometimes if you look. But I would say, if you really want to do like, keep it as low rent as possible. Even just doing flyers that you go to a photocopying place to print some out, you could
yeah,
do that. I mean, and then there's the old tricks like they say, put candy or Twizzlers on your table and things like that.
yeah. Bring people in.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just going to give my little advice. The one because I've been doing conventions since '97. This is the best advice I got because I used to do a lot of black and white art when I first started because I'm colorblind, so I always had someone color for me, or when I colored, I always have someone really look at my work. So I would do a lot of black and white. Um, make it as colorful as possible,
yeah.
and height helps. That's why those banners are great because people can see that from far away. So like if you go, I mean, get a tablecloth from a party store. I know Party City doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if they closed down by me. I don't know if it's all throughout, but like I always keep a couple of tablecloths in case I can't find my actual tablecloths, and or the convention didn't provide and I thought they were, so I always keep a couple of cheap tablecloths in there, and I'll get a couple. I'll get like black, and then maybe I'll get like yellow to add like a runner so that it brightens up the table. You know, so for me, that's how I end up doing it. But height is important so people can see from far away.
Hey,
Those,
hey,
yeah. Go
Michael,
ahead.
I was going to mention. Did you know Alex Toth was colorblind?
I did not know he was colorblind,
Yeah,
but I find it fascinating. I actually, you know what? No, I think I did. I watch. There's a YouTube channel I watch, and I forget the name of it. I have to look it up, but it's like Talking Toth or something they call it,
yeah. No, that's
and I think they mentioned it on there. Now that yeah, I think I knew.
yeah,
Obviously, I didn't remember it when you told it to me though. But yeah, I love that channel. Like when they go and break down
yeah,
all the Toth stuff. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
I mean, which is explains why he has beautiful, you know, like black and white rendering.
Right. Right. Also to go back to influences real quick.
Mm,
uh, Will Eisner, what I admired about Eisner is that what he could do in 7 to 8 pages, like some people can't do in a graphic novel or a
absolutely.
22-page comic book. I mean, that's one thing. I can't do that. I mean, I do like I said, I do self-contained stories, and I do it within about a 20 to, it varies, like 18 to 22 pages. But that's even a challenge to get everything in, and I sometimes have to sacrifice some things,
Yeah,
to be able to fit that. I mean, you still get a full story, but that's something I would often study, is Eisner being able to do what he did in 7 pages.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I got a few books around here. My favorite one's always going to be A Contract with God. But like
Yeah.
when you look at A Contract, it's basically what you're talking about. He's got these short stories, and there's like, it could like whatever chapter it is, and even though it might be a 20-page book, there's maybe something happening on 3 pages that just kind of
Right.
sidetrack the story. And I'm like, it's amazing. For me, it's always been his inking.
Yeah.
Like that's what I've always been attracted to in his
Yeah.
and he has a way of drawing the most beautifully ugly people.
Mhm.
Like they just have this, they look like real ordinary people who have just, life has hit them hard,
Yeah.
and like I'm so fascinated by the way he designs characters like
Right.
that,
That's what I loved about Alex Toth was
mhm.
I have a book that, I mean, you can see it in a lot of his works, but I have a book that I understand had to be pulled from the market because it used all these model sheets that were not licensed. But
Yeah.
I think it's called By Design, which I found out is a very rare book, but
Mhm.
it's just full of his model sheets
Mhm.
and storyboards, but from his
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera days.
Yeah.
But they're but the character designs, I mean, there's hundreds of them in there. And I
Yeah.
often go to that for inspiration because he has, because my one thing about some comic books are that sometimes some cartoonists just have generic people in the
Mhm.
background or whatever. But Toth was really good at designing characters that even and they were like out of central casting for 1930s films,
Yeah.
that they're character actors, and the minute you see them, you pretty much know their character,
Mhm.
so that kind of thing is important to me, is coming up with good character design, with for
Yeah.
different characters.
That is actually something that when I'm doing a story and I design a character, I constantly question my design. Do I have the right face? Do I have the right look? And what I've been doing, well, like what I've been doing personally is like you were just mentioning Toth. It was, he could go and he's looking back at like these actors from the 30s. I'm pulling actors now that I like and being like, oh, okay. Like just as an example, and I mentioned this on a stream a few weeks back. For the current book I'm doing, there was a father character. He's a pilot. There's a whole thing about him, but he's just like a really good dad. That's like one of the main features about him. And I couldn't decide on the design because he's ex-military. So I'm like, do I give him like the square jaw, heroic look, kind of like a flat top? Uh, and then I was watching some reruns of that show, Young Sheldon,
Yeah.
and I think that dad is just fantastic. I think he's like a really good, like he's not your regular TV dad. He was a really good dad, on that series. And I'm like, okay, he's my so I just been looking at him as the main. So I made my guy chubby now a little bit. It totally changed the personality in the look and the way I had to even write him a little bit, because now when I see him, I think of Sheldon's dad. You
Okay.
know what I mean? Except instead of a football coach, he's an ex-military pilot. Uh,
And when you do that, it's, I mean, it sometimes it varies whether you're going to base the character on the look or just the whole package, because it also helps you write the character a little if you're hearing their voice,
yeah, and to me that's why I ended up changing a little bit of the dialogue. I was like, I want him to kind of, not that he was mean or angry, but just a little more like a soft spoken kind of tone when he's with his kids.
Well, but it's funny you brought that up because the story I told you I'm working on, the space story, and it has the kind of the villain, or
Mhm.
is a crypto bro. And I
Okay.
have rarely done this, but I went through 3 character designs of that character, and I'm talking while I was working on it, and that. So, thank goodness for digital, because you can drop in I mean, and they look different, and they even had different builds. So it wasn't like I could just drop them in. I did have to still redraw around them, because
Yeah.
they filled different spaces. So I really have never had that problem before. I usually, once I come up with a character design, I go, oh, okay, this works, and I'm happy with it. But this is the first time it kept kind of changing as I did the story.
Yeah.
So, and then I also did a story. There's a later story that I have a story where um, Rob Rob's work at his company is called Justice International, becomes the basis for a streaming series. So it's basically Rob goes to Hollywood kind of a thing, and he ends up uh, having to investigate threats to the production that are going on. But he's also very unhappy that they've based the story, because the show is actually called, I think, Rob Haynes Justice International. And it's on the cover. There's a character who's a lot shorter than him, who's playing than him, and he's kind of loose, not a lot. He does, but I kind of was thinking of Tom Cruise when I did that character. But anyway, there's an agent in the story, and I did base him. I don't do this explicitly, but he is kind of based on Walter Goggins a bit.
Okay.
But that was a good example of that. I was kind of
Yeah.
trying to figure out the character, and that's what I focused on. That's what helped me a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's not something I ever really did myself. So it's a very interesting way of working. And
Yeah.
and what I want to ask, I'm going to pull up on the screen just an image of it, so people can see your character if they've never
Sure.
seen him. But where the heck is it here? There it is. All right, so this is the cover. Whoa, there it is. There we
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you is, you've been doing this for 26 issues now,
Yeah.
going on 26 issues.
Right.
You've been doing this for, it sounds like basically a book a year for the most part.
That's right.
How do you write these type of adventures that every story is doing? Like, you have him in one story, like you were saying, there's that superhero-esque story, or he's in Egypt the next one, or he's wherever, you know what I mean? Like, obviously you mentioned history. You obviously do a lot of research for this, because you like that reality. How do you come up with the ideas and say, okay, in this comic he's doing this, and he'll be in this place?
Right. It's partly because I'm a bit of a news junkie. So I just enjoy that. I read, not so much recently. I've been trying to stay away from the news, but I'm a bit of a news junkie, and it's not for my book per se. I'm just, I just soak it in, but it's those kind of things that give me story ideas. And like I said, it's partly the setting, but I'll also come up with an idea. I mean, a good example is I have an issue is 24, where Rob is on an oil tanker that gets attacked by pirates, and to go back to the Terry and the Pirates thing, these pirates are people he's encountered. It's a recurring villain. So I do that a lot. Now that I've kind of built out this universe, I have a lot of, women, women he's had some romantic engagement with return, and it's great, because it sometimes fits in, because like I have a story that I need a reporter. So I have he has a female reporter who's a friend, things like that. But anyway, where that story came from was just actually the same place where that story Captain Phillips came from. Reading about the pirates in the Persian Gulf, I think. And again, that's not really the point of the story, but that gives me an opportunity to put Rob in a situation and to do a certain kind of a story that kind of gives the series a little variety. So but and again, but that's when the research comes in also, because I was thinking, well, I got Rob on this. It's I think it's an oil tanker or a cargo ship, but and then there's these rich people who he kind of knows who are also on the ship, and I'm thinking, well, why are they on a cargo ship as opposed to a night? And I read that, oh yeah, cargo ships do take passengers. You have to pay extra for people who want a little bit of adventure. So at least there was, there's a little bit of precedent. It's not completely out of the blue or a ridiculous idea kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's and again, having done my character for so long, a lot of my earlier stories, I mean, to show how old this character is, some of my earlier stories involve the Cold War. So this was this is when there was still a Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the way things are kind of still the same. So, I still have, Russians in there, things like that. But that said, he has made, quote, friends with Russians. Like there's a Justice International office in Moscow, or at least there was. So again, it's just an opportunity to building out a world where I can put Rob in, in different scenarios. I mean, I have when what was happening during Bosnia and in Eastern Europe, that was used a lot in my stories too. Again, in those instances, I'm actually not really specifically referencing of country or place or anything like that. It's just, I just keep it kind of vague. It's Eastern Europe because, again, it's really the setting. It's really the setting I want to put in there. I don't want, I'm not trying to, make a political point or anything, although in one issue I did. But generally it's vague. As a matter of fact, I mean, I was going to announce this soon, but the issue 27 is basically going to take Rob to Ukraine.
Okay.
So I'm gonna put that, and that's partly based. I mean, I have been watching like some of the news channels on that, and including one person who I follow. He's like ex-military, but he actually went to Ukraine and embedded himself for a few days with a Ukrainian unit. Again, that's just research for me, that to give, but it ties in. But what gave me the idea is that the North Koreans being there, I mean, that's all going to be in there, drone warfare. But again, I don't think I'm going to mention the conflict specifically, although it will be very obvious. But I don't want to. It's really just an opportunity to drop Rob into that kind of a situation. And like I said, there's drones and North Koreans, and as a matter of fact, I don't do this explicitly, but when I'm thinking about the story, I'm going to have, I don't know if I'll be able to sustain it, but I want to do an EC war comic kind of a thing.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. So yeah, there is a little, I haven't really scripted the full story, but I have the most of the story kind of in my mind. It's just I haven't done it, written out, from A to the end yet. That's what I'm still working on.
Now, let me just ask you about your writing method. Do you do a full script? Do you how do you write?
Yeah, I do write a full script, and I do think it sometimes maybe makes me a little bit, I don't know if verbose is the right word, but because I do know there's, a lot of people, and I try to do it this way, just do the thumbnails, and do it that way. And I think the advantage of that is that it makes it more, it not only just the storytelling, but it focuses more on the telling the story through the art versus the words, relying less on words. But I do write as I just write it as, since I'm the artist too, I write it like a movie script, and then I am specifying page numbers. Although once I start working on it, sometimes I, that kind of adjusts a bit depending on, because sometimes I'll have too much dialogue, so I have to split it in 2 pages, or, I can kind of shorten things. But anyway, I have a full script, and then I thumbnail it. And, in the old days, I would thumbnail, do an 8.5 by 11, and then go to full page, and now I just thumbnail, which, and it's really rough, and I go to full page, and I do pay for that sometimes, because sometimes I have to kind of work it out more, even in the inking stage, or I have to flesh it out more sometimes when I'm working on the finished page.
Now, let me ask, because I do this all the time when I do comics for myself. When I create my own, because I don't write full scripts anymore. I feel for myself two things. One, I feel once I've written the script, I feel the story's out of me sometimes,
Sure.
and I don't want to draw. Or the other thing is, I feel that I have put myself kind of in this little like hole or a box that I may not be able to get out of, because now I say this has to happen here, 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 you know. So the way I work now is I just thumbnail, but I say, okay, I'm doing a 20-page comic. I need this to happen. Okay, like let's just the comic I'm working on right now. I said the first 3 pages, I'm going to introduce the main characters, which is the family. The next couple of pages, like I said, the next 5 pages, I'm setting up the problem, you know? So I said, in 5 pages, I have to set up the problem. How do I do that? And I feel a lot more looser
Sure.
of a, creatively, that I could play more. But as a writer, the script is never finished until I'm actually writing, like doing my lettering. Dialogue is never, because I always, when one of the things I learned in growing up learning about comics, I was always told you should keep your lettering to like 20 words per panel.
Yeah.
So I'm always figuring out the way, how do I say this in less words? How do I,
Yeah.
So I'm always reworking dialogue.
Yeah. And that's one of the advantages of digital, and that you can keep doing that, because I'm doing it every step of the way, where I'm kind of editing myself, to the point, and then when I'm done, or as I go along, I'm printing out proofs, and I'm marking it up to make changes and things like that, even at that stage, because again, it's easy to fix, fortunately, for the most part, at least the lettering is.
Yeah. That's always the hardest
Yeah.
stuff traditionally.
Yeah.
But, I spend so much time lettering traditionally. I cannot write in script anymore or lowercase.
Oh, wow.
Everything, like when I write lowercase, it's lowercase capital letters.
Uh-huh.
That's just how I write now. My wife thinks I have gorgeous handwriting.
So I know you said you're going back to traditional, and that includes the lettering too.
Absolutely not the lettering.
Okay.
I actually had a good friend who passed away a couple of years ago who was an amazing letterer. His name was Dan Necrosis.
Oh yeah, I think I know Dan. Yeah.
Okay. He passed away. What's it been, 3 years now?
Mm-hmm.
But he was one of the most amazing letterers, and I used to run kids sections at conventions, and he would come and he made up this really nice booklet to teach kids how to letter. So when I sometimes want a hand letter, I'll go pick up that little booklet and go through that. But for you guys out there who are like just manga fans, if you look at the first 12 books of Berserk, he was the one who did the lettering and for the English version and stuff. And he actually was, back in the 90s, before like Viz and all that came out, he had a company where he would, Japanese comics would come to him to convert it to American comics. So he would edit those things, like he did for Marvel, like the Japanese Spider-Man comics from the 70s. When they brought him in the 90s, he got to work on that. But he's also well known for I don't know if you remember the Conservation Corps from Archie Comics. They had a limited. He's the co-creator of that. So he was a really cool guy. Very interesting too, but very talented. And when I look at lettering now, that's all I think about is the stuff that he's done.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, anyway, let me just get to this page here.
Sure.
Well, first of all, this is gorgeous. I
Oh,
love
thanks.
how I love the shadows here. This is very Johnny Quest to me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and I love the designs, how every character looks different.
Yeah. Thanks.
You know, that is something like you mentioned. That is something that can be difficult to do.
Right. Yeah.
And go ahead.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead.
Well, sorry, no, I was just saying. And I love the way with the Zipatone. I love everything about how this page is laid out. How even though you got the background shadows here on this coral, and you have it on him with the light, the lighting's coming from the top. It just everything here just works so well, and
Yeah.
keeping these guys bright, no shadowing on them outside of like line weight, perfect. Like I after I read this is from book one. It took me a little bit it took me close to an hour to read it because I kept studying your art.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. It was like it's literally a book I should be able to read in 20 minutes, I think. But it took me a lot longer because I kept stopping on the art, and like just look like the way you rendered the water here. One of the most difficult things to render. Is just beautiful,
Oh,
you
thanks.
know, and the poses just feel very very real to me. Like this doesn't
Thanks.
look, there's no stiffness to it. Everything's just so fluid. This is a great composition here, just throwing
Oh,
him on a tilt like
thanks.
that.
I have to say, sometimes I look at my older, like a lot of artists, you always go,
Mm,
oh, but I have to admit that, yeah, I go, I mean, not just here, but
mm.
sometimes I go back to my early work. I said, wow, this was okay. And frankly, sometimes I go, wow, I don't do this anymore. That's the other thing. But yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm looking at this now and I'm going, oh, I'm kind of happy with this. But
Yeah, no, it's really good.
thank you. That splash page and this story in particular, this was like I mentioned, I had done it as 4 issues under Adventure Strip Digest, and this was kind of relaunching it. So in this issue, in this story, I had Rob in different locales really quickly because I wanted people to get the breadth of what he
Yeah,
what kind of setting. So that was the idea for this story. So.
yeah,
Yeah, and then as a matter of fact, I think what's here is just it's kind of like you just get fragments of a bigger story, So
mhm. Yeah. Like I will say, as I read it, I kept wondering. I'm like, oh, when are we going to see this guy again? Like
yeah,
there's more to this. Like you said, it's a self-contained story, but every little piece I could see going off in different
right,
directions. And I'm like, oh, he's got a book here later. This guy's got,
right,
he's not done with Rob yet,
right, right.
and
And like I said, that's one of the when I tell people the stories are self-contained, but if you read it through, you see recurring characters and themes. And I always still at now it's the custom at the inside front cover. I always give a little, at least characters. I give some background, so if you, in case you might need it for the story. But other than that, the story is completely self-contained. But yeah, but if you read it if you read it the series all the way through, or start reading it in order, you'll see recurring characters. So that's a little bit of, a little bit of a reward if you're reading, everything in order.
yeah, I got to finish. This is your volume one trade collecting books 1 through 4.
That's
Uh,
correct.
and I read the first 2 stories in here.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to show it all. I want people to go and get these and buy them themselves and read them. But I just love it. First of all, let me say hi to Dylan in the audience. He's joining us now. Hi, Dylan. Thank
Hey,
you.
Dylan.
Secondly, I want to, because I haven't opened any outside of this book. I haven't opened any of the other files you sent me. Is Rob still in black and white, or do you color him now?
Yeah, no, it's black and white. It's partly because those are the strips I like, but part of it is also cost.
Yeah,
The black and white's cheaper, but also, as you guessed, it takes me a year to do an issue. It would take me longer if I had to do the color of each page too.
yeah,
That's how it is. The other thing I want to say, this is kind of going back to my career. I mean, of course I would have, I would have loved to have a career in comics, I guess. But I really wanted to. I was just more focused on doing my book, as
Yeah.
opposed to trying to get work somewhere. So, I mean, and then on the, so the plus side is that, I've created kind of a body of work for it.
Yeah.
And, the other thing I should, this is kind of a plug, but, in 2018, Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con did award me an Inkpot Award for, kind of a lifetime achievement award, which was a total shock, but it was really nice recognition because, I've always kind of, just plugged away at my work, and I have, I do have people who follow my book and everything, but I'm still kind of, it's a pretty low key book. It's not, it doesn't get big distribution or anything like that. I sell it primarily online and at shows that I do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations on the Inkpot Award.
Oh, thanks.
And I was going to bring that up in a little bit, but that is such an honor. I mean, there's not many people who like receive that. So, you're in a very like, good group of people, it's a special group. It's like the SNL 5-time host.
Yeah.
Like not a lot of people are out there with that, but yeah, it's but that says a lot, like for me growing up, I always thought I wanted to work for Marvel or DC. And then I went to a convention at my local mall when I was 16. And there was a group of very young people, because they're not much older than me. They were probably, if they were 20, I think that they were kind of old if at that age. Sure. From them. But they're now friends of mine. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know Daphne Lage and JD Calderon. Mm-hmm. But they were putting out books back, and this is 92. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh crap, there's people very close to my age doing their own stuff. And that's when I said I don't want to work for Marvel or DC anymore. Right. I want to create my own world.
Right.
And but like you, I was influenced by the strips.
Right.
And you mentioned the Great Comic Book Superheroes book. I first saw that book. I was, like 9 or 10 years old. I went to the Cartoon Museum that was in Port Chester, New York. And that was on the second floor. I like, that is one of my childhood memories. I have such vivid detail of. I have very few of those like childhood memories, but that, like, I remember walking in. I remember this giant staircase. I remember everything about it. I remember there was a Bob Kane exhibit going on. Wow. And it was the first time I saw how comics actual size they were. But that book was up, and I just sat and I like read it cover to cover. I got my first cartooning book there, which was Jack Ham's How to Draw the Headed Figure.
I remember that.
I love that book. To this day, it's still one of my go-to for inspiration when I want to look at an art book. But then when I got to high school, they had the Great Comic Book Superheroes in my library. And I was the one I took it out once I discovered it almost every week for years, because I would literally copy out of it, because I'm a big Golden and Silver Age fan of comics. So I would read all that stuff and just learn. I had the stuff memorized of Plastic Man's debut, and all this stuff. It was fantastic. But yeah, for me it was strips, and a lot of it was going to visit my family in Brooklyn. My uncle loved comics. He was also a very talented artist. He never did anything with it, but like we used to draw out of the newspapers together, and he'd get the daily news. Where I grew up, we would get the local newspaper, and we didn't have all those adventure strips. We had Dick Tracy, and that was basically it.
I grew up with the daily news in my house.
Yeah. That's cool. So you had access to they would have the Phantom and right. Dick Tracy, and I think they had Steve Canyon and Brenda Starr.
They didn't have Steve Canyon. They had Terry and the Pirates with George Wonder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So, but that had all the like I was excited because I knew I was going to see the adventure strips
Right.
in when I would go, and that's what I love, and that's what I'm collecting. I collect a lot of them. I'm actually my Amazon wish list is full of Prince Valiant collections right now that I just want to pick up because I loved Prince Valiant so
Yeah.
much. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's
Have you read? I know I mentioned it earlier. Roy Crane's Buzz Sawyer. Have you read any of that? And
I not as much as I would like to. I'm
okay,
familiar with it.
yeah, because let me just say about as much as I love Kniff. That was my first
Mhm.
influence, but Roy Crane is as good, if not maybe even a better draftsman than than Kniff. I mean, and what I loved about Roy Crane, if you look at his stuff, his characters are so lively and full of life that and he was a little bit more cartoony, but he was famous for doing. He worked not in Zipatone. He worked in the. I'm blanking on the name, but the ones it looked like Zipatone, but it's where you would use the cross hatching the lines
Oh,
to
okay.
create the same, and he would create incredible effects using that stuff. Duotone, that's what it
Duotone.
was.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he worked in Duotone, and if you ever look at his stuff, and maybe offline, I'll just send you just some like panels and stuff. He
Absolutely. I'd
was
love that.
incredible,
Yeah.
but his stories were great too, and it's interesting because his stories, his characters were like really all American kind of people, and I have stuff that he continued through the '70s, and he was still doing really good work up until up until he retired. His stuff was great.
Yeah, yeah. Now let me ask you because I haven't well I never used Duotone, but wasn't that specifically a paper that you kind of worked on and then
Yeah.
so like you had to be really careful
That
using
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, if again to go back to Roy Crane, I there was I think I can't remember his name. There's one cartoonist. I mean, he was kind of a indie artist who was good at it, but Roy Crane was king of that because he would use the paper he used had two tones on it and used two different washes or chemicals with a brush to bring it out, and he would create this depth of field like say a fog or the trees are in the background that was a really strong 3D effect.
Yeah.
It was really impressive. But I bought a sheet. But yeah, when we talked about how expensive or hard to find uh, Zipatone is, this was more expensive. I once bought a sheet to just see what it was like, and if you look at it, you can see the faint lines on it. They're just parallel lines. There's cross hatching, and I got the chemical, and I created one piece of art that I used on the cover of one of my zine versions,
Hmm.
and to bring it out. But yeah, but it wasn't practical in terms from a cost thing to be able to buy, and I don't even know if they, by then they probably were hardly even making it when I first came across it.
Yeah. Hold on, something's going on. Okay, sorry. I
That's okay.
wanted to remove, but it wasn't. The mouse wasn't clicking properly.
Yeah.
Um.
You know,
Yeah.
the
Go ahead.
the other thing I was going to say is just in terms of how my self publishing and my independent comics career evolved. The other thing that helped a lot too was I told you when I started out I was doing it as a zine, which was basically photocopying
Yeah.
stories, and then when I started doing self publishing, that was at a time when the self publishing boom started, and what helped that is that back then initially, printers wouldn't talk to you if you weren't doing like at least 3,000. That was low. You
Yeah.
could the way
Yeah.
offset printing works, but print on demand really helped change the game. Because you could keep you don't have to get a lot of inventory because again, back in the day, you'd have to order 3,000, 5,000 copies, and then
Yeah.
that's hard to move when you're an independent creator, at least, especially once the market became a little saturated. So I do print on demand now, and that makes a big difference because again, you can just order. I can keep things in stock, but I don't have to get hundreds of issues to just
Yeah.
keep it in
Yeah.
stock.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's smart. I've actually talked about this um, on my show with other artists, and I think this will become a discussion in a future show. Um, but I tell people, go print on demand if you want a book. But I think these days, with the way people are getting information, digitally, I think looking at a digital um, book is I don't want to say a smarter way to go, but another way to work it, to like how people use Webtoon or whatever. They build their audience,
Right.
and then they give the book away for a year. Let's say they tell a story over a year, they build an audience, and then it's like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to collect that 1 year of work, but now I'm going to add in an extra 30 pages that you never saw before,
Right.
and there's another story, or there's behind the scenes, or fan art, whatever it is. It's just, and you turn and you put the book and sell it. And sometimes I think, at least for people starting out, the newer artists starting out, I think that might be the best way to go. As someone who's been doing conventions probably just as long as you, because you've been doing it longer than me, but I'm tired of spending money on
Oh
books.
yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I just talked about print on demand, but the other
Yeah.
things like crowdfunding, and
Mhm.
Kickstarter. I tell people, if when people come to for advice, I mean, I would say, yeah, crowdfunding is
Yeah.
I mean, especially with with the way the distribution right now market is like
Yeah.
really kind of uncertain. It's a great way to go, and the model you talked about, yeah, that's starting on the web, and which has you don't really have that much overhead,
Yeah.
just you just everyone's got internet access, so just putting it up there and then and collecting, yeah, that's really the way to go. But again, I mean, but I always point out, but I'm a dinosaur, so I haven't done the crowdfunding and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
grew
Yeah.
up through the traditional way, and for better or worse, that's how I'm doing it.
Well, that's kind of my I was talking to my wife about crowdfunding today, because I'm like, I had my show almost weekly has a crowdfunding to look at, which is fine. I'm not like, my show is
Sure.
about promoting indie creators, getting their work out there, and I don't. It's not something I hate. I'm like, hey, you guys have a crowd, awesome. Let's talk about it. Let's really make it, highlight it, shine, all that stuff. But um, everybody's always asking, when are you going to do one? And I'm like, I have the worst anxiety
Yeah.
on the planet, and I'm like, if I do it, and this is what I was telling my wife, and she knows my anxiety, and I'm like, if I do, I'm going to be the guy. Even if I ask for like $500, something low, and I only get to 450, and I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my, where's that extra $50? I'm not going to get, if it's like Kickstarter, you don't get your money, so it's like,
Well, hit me up if you get
yeah.
that close, and I'll do it at the beginning. But no, but
I
I
appreciate it, but
totally agree with that. I
yeah,
mean, because I'm the same way, and I know someone who's recently went through it, and but he was good. He went through the research, and the one thing he found, and both in his research and then doing it, is that it is a full-time job, because you're
yeah,
constantly I see, I back some Kickstarter things, and but you don't see all the work that goes into it. It's a lot of work. It's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but it's 24/7. You're hitting that.
yeah,
But the other thing I'll say is that one thing I've learned about the Kickstarter, I mean, obviously there's some people who I'm sure get massive support, like Steve Rude. He's
yep,
because I mean, I love his stuff,
yeah, me
but
too.
a lot of Kickstarter stuff, it's in terms of readership, it's not that much more than what I'm doing. It's almost like a boutique approach,
Mhm.
and and in Kickstarter, yeah, someone once pointed out, and it's true, that people are paying $20 for you know for a book that if you were selling, it's not going to be $20 at a
Yeah,
table. I mean, my books sell for $3.99.
mhm.
So but the thing is, if I went through Kickstarter, they probably would not be $3.99. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
assuming that but at the same time, I know you're adding a lot of value to that when you're doing
yeah,
Kickstarter, with prints and books. But that's where I go, oh God, I don't know if I could do that.
yeah, yeah.
That's where my anxiety would come in, that you have to start I want to just say, here's my book, and
And
that's
that's the
it.
thing, and like right now, I'm not doing. I have one convention in June planned for
Mhm.
this year, and I'm not doing many conventions because number one, I don't have a lot of product right now.
Mhm.
I'm rebuilding my product. I got my Wiz book, I got some Zorro books, I got a few other things, but I'm like, I don't need to do shows right now. When give me a year or two and I've built my product up, like the one I'm working on right now, it's 20 pages, but it's supposed to be about a 60 to 80 page story. I haven't figured out how long it's going to be,
Right.
but I'm going to put it out in sections online. I've decided already because I don't want to spend money right now.
That's smart.
But I might, but for the first 20 pages, I might print it because it might be when I do a show or I meet people and say you can read the rest online, like almost like a sampler, and hand it out and
Right.
give it away or sell it for a low price or something,
Right.
so that one I'm still considering, but the other stuff I wouldn't put out until it's collected,
Right.
you know.
Right.
I'm
And
sorry, you were going to say something.
no, I was just saying, and that's a model that works. I've seen
Yeah.
people do things like that. It is amazing. I mean, as long as you've got a good product and you can pitch it. I mean, all
Mm.
those models, really do work for you.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say about doing conventions is, like I said, that is one of my quote distribution channels.
Mhm.
But yeah, but especially if you have a good show, it's really energizing. That's the other thing.
Mm.
It helps motivate you to go back to the drawing board. And just I was at WonderCon at the end of March, and yeah, I was really surprised because I didn't know what to expect. I've done the show, but I hadn't exhibited with my own at my own table there for a while. But it was outside of San Diego Comic Con. It was one of my best shows.
That's great.
Yeah. So I was both surprised, but obviously also happy with that. So, and I think I told you it was nice, and it was a nice mix. I mean, this is nice. I get a lot of people who've been following the book, some for, the whole time,
Yeah.
but it's nice to be also adding new people. I get that every show, which is great. And they start coming back. So it's really fun. And again, it helps that. The other thing I was going to say is that the other challenge is, when I was starting out, you'd have one book. I used to say, you can only sell that one book, and you have to sell a lot of those to.
Yeah.
Well, once you start getting product, that's okay. You could sell 3, 4 books, at least from to new people. But
Yeah.
now I'm at the other end of the spectrum when you have 26 books. It's a combination of you have a lot of product at your table, but also pitching it. But like I said, the one advantage I have is that the books are self-contained.
Mm.
And the nice thing I don't know if I'm just more conscious of it, but the one thing I've noticed recently, which is good, and maybe it has to do with the way comics being in bookstores and things like that, is that people, I'm glad, aren't as hung up as that they have to which is number one. You know what I mean? They're not as hung up. I'm glad about that. Sometimes when I'm talking about this issue or that issue, they go, oh, I want that. So that's really nice that that people will pick up random issues. There's obviously there's still some say, oh, I want to start at the beginning. One, they'll pick that up, but but it's nice that my books that people will pick up at any time, or they're happy to just pick it up based on what the story is. One issue that's my wife's favorite, but that she always says that always gets a lot of people. I have an issue where Rob that takes place at, again, I don't name it, but it's at a comics convention where
Okay.
he's hired to protect a valuable comic book, and it ends up in a big chase through a comic convention, and it's a very fun issue, but that I have a banner for that, and it says "Death at Comic-Con." That's kind of the title of the story, and that's what it says on the banner, and that always attracts a laugh, and a lot of people who get the book, based just on that.
Yeah.
And again, then this is also to show the different genres. I also have an issue. A few issues. I have an issue that is a baseball issue where Rob goes undercover on a minor league baseball team, and he gets more obsessed with trying to get a hit than solving the case. So his partner does all the work. And what was fun about that is, I'm kind of a sports person. I'm not a huge sports person. Partly because of time, and I played baseball as a kid. But what I like about that story is I just like the fact, hey, I get to draw Rob in a baseball uniform and a whole team and a big the climax of the story is a baseball game. And it was fun, talking about writing. It was fun building out a baseball game in terms of, okay, he gets a hit here, this goes to second, that kind of a thing. Because
Yeah.
what happens is at the end of the story, the big game and the case, and I'll just keep it at that, kind of collide at the end. So what happens at the end solves the case. So anyway, that's and then I have a story where it's like I always pitch it because it was inspired by Black Hawk Down. I said, oh, this was inspired by Black Hawk Down. It's Rob rescuing a downed pilot in the Middle East. But again, that gets a lot of people. They say, oh, I'll get that.
Yeah. No, and that I mean, again, you pull from life. You do your research. I mean, that's what makes. Honestly, I think that's what keeps people coming back.
Yeah,
is that you really have a good idea of what you love. Like you mentioned, you're not a big sports fan, but you used to play baseball, so baseball is something that you enjoyed, and you were able to bring it into a story. Right. Baseball wasn't my game. I was basketball, and I studied martial arts. That was my childhood. So, like, I know if I was to do something like you're doing, I would probably either put him in a basketball game or a karate tournament or something.
Right. And real quick, we're talking about the baseball issues. I mean, just drawing like the silhouette of the stadium with the players on the field, things like that, and drawing, and then also getting the feel of I mean, again, it's on the cover, but getting the feel of the bat hitting the ball and it flying. I mean, and then portraying that was really fun. Now, to be fair, I mean, we talked about like Eisner. He had an issue of baseball comics, and there was this other strip on. It was a daily strip about a baseball player. I think it was called Ozark Ike, something like that. But yeah, those were reference material for me. And I said, oh wow, that how they capture the excitement of a baseball game, and the actions, the action of baseball. I love that stuff. I mean, a good example is like a lot of cartoonists, I hate drawing cars, but I love, and I'm not a car racing fan, but I love on film and in comics capturing that sense of movement Toth did that because he did do Hot Wheels comics, and he did a lot of cartoon comics, and I abandoned it just because the story wasn't, I don't know, just doing it for me, but I want to go back to it. I did a story where it involved Rob being able to jump into a Formula One race car and then being in a kart chase, basically. And it was just because I wanted to draw that, where you have the speed lines and things like that, and you cut to, shifting gears, kind of a speed racer feel.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That, I mean, again, it just makes it visually and the story interesting, and it creates variety and texture in the series.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, listen, there's just so much I want to talk to you about this. No, because you're getting my mind like thinking about so many things. It's just I don't know where to go. Hold on one second. Let me first say hi to Super D out in the audience. I don't know if you're familiar with Super D.
No.
He is a whoops, sorry. Let's put it out there.
I want to thank everyone too for tuning in. I appreciate it.
He's a cartoonist himself, by the way.
Let me just say also my website is wcgcomics.com. So wcgcomics.com, and you can, obviously my work is there. You can see samples. Free comic book day. Sometimes I put a free comic book digitally on there, and
cool.
And then all my social media are linked on my website, so you could on the website, so you can see it.
I was actually just copying your website so I could paste it into the comments, so everyone can just click on it afterwards.
Thanks.
But yeah, he even has a web store on there. Just click on shop, and you could see the books he has and what's available. I think it's really, really cool. I want, you sent me some digital copies of books. I have to sit down and read them. What the plan is for me now, because I put them on my iPad, is every morning with my cup of coffee is
cool.
is one issue.
Oh, thanks.
So
I
that
hope you're
that
not disappointed.
no, listen, I read the first two. I don't think,
Yeah.
after that, it really is a fun trip. And by the way, I didn't ask, what's your target audience for this? Like, who are you selling to?
Um, well, I'm doing it for me, of
Mhm.
course, but I have to admit, early on it was mostly like people who like the old strips and stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, it it took the audience to show me that my book was had a lot more broader appeal than I gave it credit for, which I in a way I knew because my I always say my book isn't gritty or dark unless I want to do a story that's like that.
Yeah.
It's more fun. It's yes, fun and lighthearted. I always say,
Yeah.
and as I kind of implied, some stories are almost straight comedies.
Yeah.
I just want to do a lot of variety. But what I mean is that I've I have uh, you always have the stereotype of the comic book reader being the guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
but no, but I have women fans. I have some kids. I mean, my favorite story I often tell was a couple years ago at San Diego Comic Con. This dad came up to me and said, "Hey, my daughter," and she was about 12. She goes, "My daughter really likes the art, but is it okay for her?" And I said, "Yeah, most of there's a few issues that I mean, there's nothing too adult. It just might be over her head, or maybe but there's nothing inappropriate." But he said, "Okay, that's great." So I actually said, "Let me curate some issues for her." So they came over and I explained what some of them, and she took 2 or 3 issues, and then they came back the next day and he said, "Oh, she read them, she loved them." So they got a whole bunch of other issues,
That's
and that's
fantastic.
yeah, that was boy, that was really nice to hear. And this was a 12-year-old girl,
Yeah.
so that was really nice.
It's really interesting that you said that about a 12-year-old girl, because that's about what, like sixth, seventh grade.
Yeah,
I don't remember if I was telling my wife about it after I read it or just a friend of mine, but one of like my feedback I told them was, I see these books in like a school book fair,
yeah,
like for middle school kids. Like that's where I see like people picking it up. Like I could just totally, because I've worked in schools before. I remember going to the book fairs, but like I remember, like, I could see the comics there and walk around, and I could just see these books just highlighted right there. I think it's perfect for like middle school and above.
hmm yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. No,
you got to
I
figure out how to do that. I don't know if it's
yeah.
all Scholastic still, and you got to hook up with
Yeah,
them. But
it's funny you said that because I just saw a preview. I didn't really know about. I vaguely knew it, but I saw a documentary about how Scholastic basically, in terms of comics, it was built on bone.
yeah,
That was it was like I said, it was a documentary. It was really amazing. And this is a comic that had been out for a while, and they just reissued it, and it just found a whole new audience and it
yeah,
exploded. I mean, like I said, it already had been finished and it exploded, but the fact that it found a whole new audience, and at book fairs and things like that, and
yeah.
amongst kids, it's great.
I remember a few years ago, I was substituting a class on Halloween. I think it was like a third or fourth grade class. And one girl came in dressed up as a character from Bone.
Oh
I don't
wow,
I don't remember which one, off the top of my head. If it was that day or within that week, I could have told you who it was. But
right.
they dressed up as one of the characters, and no one in the class got it
Oh wow,
except for me.
right.
And and I just remember her being so upset, and she was like, she told me, like she's like, these kids don't read. Like she was just so angry, and like, you know and just sat there talking to me about how much she loved Bone,
That's sweet.
and where she's at in the story. And I'm like, well, it was a while that I read it, but it was, I'm
What's
like,
funny about that series? Maybe
mhm,
this is a bit of a tangent, but I bought all the issues, the original issues,
mhm,
but I didn't. I kind of lost the thread of it at some point. So I ended up like a few years later getting one of the complete collection, and that's
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I read it all the way through finally.
Wow.
And that was a great way to read it actually. But
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've actually never finished it because, like you,
yeah,
I kind of fell off in the store,
yeah,
but I never ended up buying any of those collections. So
uh-huh.
maybe one day that's in my future.
Yeah.
Uh,
I have it's a paperback of the whole series.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I've seen that. I just again, it's one of those things I don't want to spend a crap
oh
ton of
God.
money on.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
there's so much we have to.
well, it's funny. I don't have a comic shop near me anymore. The ones that are like would be local are out of business,
Oh.
and one was doing sales on books, and I could have picked it up for a decent price, but I was collecting the Usagi Yojimbo
Yeah.
collections, and book 2 and 3 were there, and they're like, I'll give you a deal if you buy book 2 and 3, and I'm like, okay. So
Well, like I said, I know that there's a lot out there. We all have
yeah.
to make choices. So
And Eli is joining us. Hey Eli, thank you for tuning in. We're actually going to be wrapping up in a few
sure.
minutes. We've hit a good hour and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, listen, that's great.
It flew by.
Yeah, it did. I've had so much fun talking with you. Before we go though, and we could talk about this off air, I want to show you a book. I'm just going to grab it off my bookshelf. I could probably
Okay.
grab it without really moving too far. You were talking about old comics, and obviously you like them, I like them. I have a book here, and as you were talking, I'm like, I got to show you this book. And have you ever checked it out? It's called The Secrets of Professional Cartooning by Ken Muse. Have you ever seen this book?
I think I've seen it, but I don't think I've ever gone through it.
It is so. I mean, listen, this is from. I got to look it up. The '60s, maybe. Oh God, I got to take off my glasses to see this. I don't see in here right now the date. This is from '81. So, but what's really cool about it is like they'll go through different pens and show you how
Wow.
they look, and here's a Popeye strip. Okay, this is who was doing this, but you can always say his name wrong. Sagendorf, when Bud
Oh
was
yeah.
doing this.
But yeah, I know. I remember that name. Yeah.
So it talks a little bit about it. Then it shows you what the actual size they draw on.
Oh, what a great book.
And they'll tell you here. So he didn't go to art school, didn't go to college. He uses Pelican ink. He works on three ply Bristol, high surface. The pen for draw it was a Gillette. 170. He used a 290 and 303. He uses any brush. Pen for lettering is Speedball A5. His pencil was a turquoise HB. He used a kneaded eraser, and and then it just takes you through the stuff, and it's showing a script in here. Like
Wow.
it'll do that for a lot of really cool artists, and you'll see. And this is what I loved about it. And you get to learn about all the different types of artists right there. Like I mentioned Brenda Starr earlier.
Yeah, that was a strip I read.
Yeah, so you could see that there.
That's a great book. I haven't seen that, and I think it's partly. If you said it was 81,
Yeah,
that was. I think I was in college, so I wasn't seeing, because I have to tell you, early on, as much as I like comics, I like books about comics and books about cartooning. I had tons of them. There was that one that was pretty good by Dan Atkins Richardson. That was a book on cartooning. I don't know if you know that one, but
I need to know the title. I'm better with
yeah,
that.
I don't have it. I have it. I don't even think I have it on my bookshelf right here anymore. I think I have that in storage because it's so old. But I used to love a lot of those books.
That was my big. There was a long time I collected a lot of cartooning books. Some were how to draw. Some I bought because I was teaching, but then I was looking for old books. and eBay was my best friend for a long time.
You
And
know, there's a book, I have no memory of what the title is, but when I first moved to California, and this was in Northern California, there was a library near me, and they had a book about, how to cartoon. And what was interesting is they had, I mean, I think the author must have been friends with them. They had a lot of work by Richard Corbin in there,
really,
yeah, then that really surprised me. I mean, at the time, I don't know how, I can't recall if I was aware of Corbin, but that's not usually what you'd see in one of those books. But there was a lot of Corbin in that
Hmm.
book. I always remember, but I have no memory of what the book was, because I would just take it out and I
yeah.
would pour through it, but I don't have it, and I've never,
Yeah.
got it.
There was a YouTube video I recently watched within the last week. It's maybe a year or two old, and they were, some guy found, I don't remember who it was, but some guy found a book at a used bookshop called um I think it was called How to Make Adventure Strips. And when I looked up
Wow.
the artist, I think he was an Australian artist.
Hmm.
So it's a short book, like maybe 60, 70 pages. It doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it focuses
Wow.
on the idea of storytelling for adventure strips. And here's how you draw characters. It had all the traditional stuff. I don't know how old the book is, but I'm like, I thought that was pretty cool. Like if I
Yeah.
was a kid, that would have been like my favorite,
Yeah, me too.
book, just learning everything. So,
Right.
and honestly, as I saw it, I thought of you because I'm like, I've read your stuff and I'm like, this is the stuff that influenced you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that was what I was seeing. And it seems you and I have very similar
Yeah.
influences.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one thing that I'm proud of, though, is that even though I have all those influences, I kind of did find my own style.
Yeah.
And it's not. I always point out, even though when I tell people my influences, I always point out it's not a nostalgia book. Not, you know what I mean? It's very much a modern adventure series. I mean,
Yeah.
frankly, actually will often mention Mission Impossible, things
Mhm.
like that, to kind of get across if people aren't familiar with this, with the other strips that influenced me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
All
I
right.
should probably end this. You can stay on in backstage if you're okay and you want to hang
Yeah.
out for a moment.
Sure.
But first off, thank you for coming on. I had a pleasure chatting with you. Um, Honestly, come back, man. You got to come back. We got to talk more. There's a lot more that we could probably be discussing, and not just about your stuff, just comics
Sure.
in general and artists and whatever. It's, I had a
Yeah.
lot of fun. We'll
Okay.
totally do that. Super D has said this has been a lot of fun to, does it say listen to? I'm sorry, I have a little Snoopy thing blocking it. Listen so far. So I'm glad you all tuned in. Thank you so much. For those watching, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on and subscribe on Twitch. Hopefully, in the next few weeks, this will come back to Facebook as well. Yeah, I'm still, like I said, I'm still using the free version of Restream, which only allows two places. Yeah, and in the meantime, wait, and I might do some streaming this weekend. I might be doing some drawing streaming. I'm talking about my comic. I didn't get a chance to stream the last weekend to talk about where I was in my making my comic. And next week, I have the guys from Fugitive Poems coming on. So they're returning, Christian DiMatteo and James Lyons. You guys all know them and love them. And, they are a great thing. And if you're a kid watching, don't watch next week. They don't do kid friendly books, and they don't talk kid friendly all the time. So, but they are great. They have a lot. They're really doing very well for only being out since the pandemic. Like that's when they started doing their own work together, and yeah, they got some really cool stuff they're going to talk about. They have a new book coming out. Yeah, and so stay tuned for that. And with that, again, Randy, thank you.
Thank you.
It was so much fun.
Thanks to everyone who
Yeah.
listened in too.
Yeah, we had a good. I think we had a good show tonight.
Yeah. Great.
All right.